Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And Chede.
We're looking at something a little different. Usually when we talk about privacy, we focus on the legal side of things. But this time, we're going to explore how privacy is really a safety issue and how your privacy can be kind of like a safety issue. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
And to guide us through this, we're going to be looking at some insights from Debbie Reynolds, the Data Diva.
Oh,
I love her stuff.
Yeah.
And in her latest article, she lays out this framework called safety by design. And I think it's something every listener needs to hear about.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how she
Especially right now.
frames it. Yeah.
It's so timely with all the stuff going on.
Exactly. It's like we're all leaving these digital trails
Yeah.
everywhere we go. And yeah, sometimes I think we forget about that.
Yeah, no, I do.
And we get so caught up in the convenience of it all
Right.
that we don't always think about the risks.
Safety aspect of it.
Yeah, right. So she really hits on that and how. You know, this isn't just some abstract legal concept. This is really about protecting ourselves in this digital world.
And she uses some real-world examples that I think are really powerful. Like, for instance, did you know that 80% of stalking victims report that technology was used against them in some way?
Wow. 80%.
Yeah, it's a pretty startling statistic.
It is.
And it really highlights the fact that this is a very real threat.
Yeah, you know, it's one thing to think about it abstractly, but when you hear a number like that, it really kind of hits home.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's not always like some super sophisticated hack or something. Yeah. It could be just like misusing everyday technology.
Exactly. Like something as simple as an AirTag.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those little trackers that are meant for finding your keys?
Right.
Well, they've become a tool for stalkers, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary thought. Like, that is really disturbing to think about.
It is.
And there was also that case with the FTC in Curated, that data broker that was selling location data.
Right.
And it's just crazy to think about how, like, the apps you use every day, maybe even just to find a good coffee shop, could be used to track your movements.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't realize that that data is being collected and sold.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think about it all the time.
It's easy to just kind of go about your day and then not really think about it.
Right. It's not at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah.
All the time.
But it's important to be aware of it.
It is.
Because it can have real consequences.
And that's what makes Reynolds' framework so important, I think.
Absolutely.
Because it's like a roadmap. It's not just for the developers. It's for us, too.
Yeah, it's for everyone.
Right? To think about, like, how we're using tech and how we can use it more safely.
Be more mindful of how we're using it.
Okay, so let's break down this framework then.
Okay.
What are some of the key principles that, you know, not only developers should be keeping in mind, but users too?
Well, she outlines three main pillars. The first one is data collection and user consent.
Okay.
The second is data minimization and user control. And the third is location privacy and data masking.
All right, so a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Let's start with the first one, data collection and user consent.
Okay.
So what makes this pillar so important?
Well, it really all comes down to transparency and agency. You as the user should know what data is being collected about you and why.
And not just like buried in some long terms of service document.
Exactly. Like we've all seen those and we just kind of click agree and move on.
I'm so guilty of that all the time.
We all are.
But safety by design is really about moving away from that.
Right.
And demanding that apps be upfront about their data practices.
Right. It's about being more intentional with the data that we share.
So how can they do that?
Well, one way is through what Reynolds calls context-based incremental consent.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means that apps should only ask for permission to access data when it's directly relevant to what you're doing at that moment.
Okay, so give me an example.
Sure. So instead of a map app asking for your location as soon as you download it, it would only ask when you're actually trying to get directions.
Okay.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like, why would it need my location before I'm trying to use it for that reason?
Exactly. It's about respecting your context as a user and not just grabbing as much data as possible up front.
I can't tell you how many times I felt like an app was asking for permissions it didn't really need.
Right.
And it's like, wait a minute. Why does this need access to my photos?
Exactly. And that's where clear visual cues come in, which is another essential part of this pillar.
Okay.
You should always be able to tell when an app is accessing sensitive data, like your location microphone or camera.
Right.
Think about those little microphone icons that pop up on your phone. Those are clear visual cues in action.
Yeah, okay. I have to admit, I don't always pay attention to those. I kind of just like,
I think that's a common error.
I just want to get the thing done,
Yeah.
and I'm not really thinking about it.
It's easy to just kind of dismiss them and move on.
I do, yeah.
But safety by design encourages us to be more mindful about those cues
Oh,
and to realize that even those seemingly small choices about data permissions can actually have a big impact
Right.
on our privacy and safety.
expert. Yeah, it's like they're trying to tell us something, like,
Yeah.
hey, wake up, pay
Right.
attention.
Exactly.
Okay, so that kind of leads us into the next pillar of this framework, right?
Right.
Data minimization and user control.
Yes.
Okay, so less data, more control.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good to me.
Right.
But how does that actually work?
Well, think about it this way. If an app doesn't have a ton of data in the first place,
Okay,
there's less to be misused or compromised.
right. Less to steal.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like having a smaller target.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So how do we shrink the target?
Well, one way is by having privacy-centric default settings.
Okay, what does that mean?
So apps should start with the most private settings possible, and then give you the option to open things up later if you want to.
Okay, so they don't start by just like
No.
taking everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
They don't just assume that you want to share everything. They give you the control to decide what you're comfortable with.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Give me an example of that.
Sure. So imagine you're setting up a new social media account.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be better if the default setting was a private profile? That way you're not automatically broadcasting everything to the world?
Yeah, I mean, you could always make it public later if you wanted to,
Exactly.
but you would be making that choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're in control
Yeah.
from the start.
Okay, so what are some other ways that apps can give us more control?
Well, have you ever noticed how some apps let you customize your privacy settings for different contact groups?
I think I've seen that, yeah, like maybe like a messaging app or something,
Right, exactly.
but I don't really use that feature.
Well, it's a really handy feature. It's based on the idea that, we have different levels of trust with different people in our lives.
Right.
You might be perfectly comfortable sharing certain information with close friends, but maybe not with acquaintances or colleagues.
Sure.
So these customizable controls allow you to fine-tune your privacy based on those relationships.
So basically, like, you can share some stuff with your family, but not your coworkers.
Exactly.
Okay,
It's about having that granular control over your data.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check if the apps I use have that. That's really smart.
I think a lot of people would be surprised by how much control they actually have if they just dig into the settings a little bit.
Right. We just kind of accept whatever.
Yeah, we tend to just accept the defaults and move on.
But this is all about being more
Yeah.
proactive. Okay. All right. So that brings us to the third pillar, which is all about our location.
Right.
Location privacy and data masking.
Yes. This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, I have to admit,
Yeah.
the whole idea of location tracking kind of freaks me out.
I understand that.
Like, it feels like someone's always watching me. Big brother.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a sensitive area.
It is.
And for good reason. I mean, think about it. If someone knows your location at all times, they can figure out where you live, where you work, who you spend time with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even sensitive places that you go, like a doctor's office or a support group.
Yeah, that is not good.
Right.
So it's really not just about convenience at that point. It's about safety.
Yeah.
And that's why Reynolds is such a strong advocate for location tracking being opt-in, not opt-out.
Absolutely. You should have complete control over whether or not an app can track your location.
Right. Okay. So opt-in is the first step.
Yeah.
But what else can apps do to make this safer? Because sometimes you do need an app to know where you are, like if you're using a ride-sharing service or ordering food delivery.
Exactly. There are legitimate reasons for location sharing, but the key is to give you more control over how and when that information is shared.
Okay.
So for instance, some apps are starting to offer time-limited permissions. Instead of giving an app access to your location indefinitely,
Yeah.
you can choose to allow it for just a specific time period.
So like an hour or a day or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then the app would have to ask for permission again.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's like setting boundaries
Yeah.
for how long an app can see where you are.
I like that. So what are some other options?
Well, a few things to look for. First, can you easily delete or pause your location history?
Okay.
That's crucial for preventing those location-based risks that we talked about. Second, can you turn off real-time activity broadcasting? Some apps, like social media platforms or fitness trackers, they love to show your friends exactly where you are in real time.
Yeah, I don't really like that. I feel like that's a little too much.
Yeah, it's basically like putting yourself on a public map,
It is.
which can be a big privacy risk.
Definitely.
So if you do want to use those features, some apps offer the option to mask your location. So instead of broadcasting your exact coordinates, it might just show that you're in a general area.
Okay, so it's kind of like a
Right.
compromise.
Exactly. You get the convenience without sacrificing all of your privacy.
I like that. Okay.
And then there are some features that are especially important for high-risk apps,
Mm-hmm.
like dating platforms.
Oh, okay.
Things like invisible mode or alias-based
The
settings.
invisible mode. That sounds interesting.
It's pretty straightforward. It lets you browse or interact with the app without revealing your identity.
Right.
And with alias-based settings, you can use a pseudonym instead of your real name.
So it's like having a secret identity online.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. Especially when you're meeting people you don't know.
Right. It's a
Yeah.
good way to have that extra layer of protection.
Okay, cool. So we've talked a lot about what should be done, but are companies actually putting these safety by design principles into practice? Or is it all just talk?
Actually, there's a really great success story that Reynolds highlights. And it involves the AirTags that we talked about earlier
Yeah.
being misused for stalking.
Right.
So when reports of that started surfacing, Google and Apple actually stepped up and collaborated to create cross-platform alerts.
Wait, so they're competitors? And they work together?
Exactly. They realized that this was a serious safety issue that affected users on both platforms.
Okay.
So now if an unknown AirTag is detected moving with you, you'll get a notification on your phone regardless of whether you have an iPhone or an Android.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
So they basically turned a safety hazard into a safety feature.
exactly.
That's really impressive.
It is, and it shows the power of safety by design in action. Companies can prioritize safety and build trust by responding proactively to privacy threats.
And I guess it's good for their reputation, too.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they do stuff like that.
It builds confidence in their brand.
So it sounds like we need a whole new way of thinking about how we design and use technology.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not enough to just tack on privacy and safety as an afterthought. It needs to be a fundamental part of the process from the very beginning.
It makes you wonder, in this world where data is king, what does true digital safety even look like?
That's a great question, and I don't think there's a simple answer. But I do think that Reynolds' framework gives us a good place to start. It shows us that there's a path forward, a way to benefit from technology without giving up our privacy and safety.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. Technology isn't inherently bad.
Right.
It can be an incredible tool. It can connect us. It can educate us. It can make our lives easier. But we have to be thoughtful about how we use it.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether.
No, not at all. It's about being more aware of the potential risks and making informed choices.
So what's the one thing we want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
Be mindful. Be mindful of the data you're sharing. Be mindful of the apps you're using. And be mindful of the potential consequences.
Don't just click agree without thinking.
Exactly. Take a moment to understand what you're agreeing to. Look at your settings, explore the options, and don't be afraid to say no to data collection if it doesn't feel right.
Remember, you have a choice.
You too.
You have the right to say no. You have the right to protect your privacy.
Absolutely. Your data is valuable and your privacy is a fundamental right.
It's empowering to remember that.
It is. You're not just a passive consumer. You have a voice, and you can use it to demand better from the companies you interact with.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on privacy and safety, we want to leave you with this final thought. In a world where convenience is often king, what are we truly giving up? And are we willing to pay that price?
It's a question we all need to ask ourselves, I think.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into privacy and safety.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful and empowering. And we'll see you next time.